Hey guys, it's Dasher Zach back here with another review, this time of the Pulsar X3. This is what we hope to be the spiritual successor to the legendary Logitech G703 shape that so many people know and love. Let's see how Pulsar did implementing the mouse from QC to the new switches they choose to use in the main clicks. So here it is, the Pulsar X3 in the size 2 and white colorway. It has Pulsar's new XS1 sensor. Not sure why brands feel the need to give names to their sensors that aren't just, it's a 3950, it's Pulsar's implementation. It's very good. Also comes with the 1K dongle included, not the 8K dongle. Performs amazingly on 1K, but if you want to purchase that separately, I believe it's $20 or $25. So starting to take a look at the mouse itself here. On the bottom, you have the standard Pulsar stock skates. I would give them probably like a 2.5 out of 5 rating for speed. They're standard stock skates. They're more on the control side. They're rounded, they're nice. They haven't really changed from what I can tell from their previous generation of mice. I prefer faster skates like the Jade Airs, but I have no problem using these as well. There is this new dust filter they added, as all of their mice typically have holes in the bottom, and that's much appreciated to prevent dust and potentially pet hairs if you have a pet from getting in there. Beside that, nothing much to write home about. Taking a look at the main clicks, they've switched from the Razer opticals, which were much maligned in the community, to Kale Go opticals, which is the same thing Endgame Gear used in their OP1 Wii and their XM2 Wii. I didn't love them in those mice, and I like them a little bit less even in this mouse. So there's a healthy amount of and there's definitely some post-travel here. I had a friend who experienced very minimal pre-travel on his copy. Interesting to note. The clicks themselves feel not super tactile and not very, they're just a little bit mushy to me. Something I like to do when I test a mouse and its clicks is, if I'm doing like a double click test, can I spam this click infinitely and not get kind of like stuck where I actuate the switch and then I can't come back up from that and I get kind of like stuck at a click. So that occurs, I'm kind of even showing you this, it just kind of stays down for me. It doesn't like, you can get streaks where it works well, but it doesn't stay how I want it to. It doesn't keep spamming. This occurs for me a lot more because of how I grip it low and forward on the mouse here. It's a little bit less if you're doing like an aggressive claw and clicking toward the top. It's a little more consistent, but I do still have that issue. I mean, overall, the clicks are fine. They're not great, though, and I would honestly rate them below that of like the Razer opticals you would see on something like the X2H here. They're a lot more tactile. They're hollow. These don't feel quite as hollow. They just kind of feel lifeless and, I don't know, underwhelming to me. So another thing to note about the clicks is like for actuation, toward the bottom, toward the top, it's a little bit heavier at the top, but nothing crazy. So for your aggressive claw grips, that's a good thing. There's also like a little bit of play back and forth, a little bit of wobble on these clicks. They're not rock solid. I've seen a lot better, but it's not something like you would see in the Skyrox V8, and it doesn't cause any problems in game. Coming to the side buttons here, they're not as big as the G703, which we'll see later, but we do have very large side buttons compared to most mice, and they're pretty accessible for how they are on an ergo. Sometimes they get really high on an ergo. These are pretty easy to reach, specifically with how big they are. They're clicky. They're not the most tactile response, but there's nothing wrong with them at all. I do really like the size. They're probably one of my favorite features on the mouse. So moving on to the scroll wheel here, another feature of the mouse that I'm just not a huge fan of. The plastic feels really cheap. The middle mouse click, though, is very light and spammable. So functionally, it's very good. But like when you click it in, it just feels almost like a hollow office mouse to me. It just feels really cheap. They still have the Pulsar blue encoder, which is very good, but otherwise, just really not a fan of the scroll wheel at all. Beside that, one last thing to mention is the coating. It's very good, rubberized, not too rubberized to the point where you're going to see a bunch of hand fingerprints on it, although they do show up more on the black copy that my friend has. If you're going to get a Pulsar mouse and you don't mind, like if you're neutral between white and black, I would always just suggest that you go with the white one. The coating seems to be just slightly chalkier, but still rubberized, very grippy, and it just doesn't show fingerprints quite as much. So this coating is honestly top tier for me. Another QC note is there is absolutely no side flex at all that I can detect in my copy. No creaking. Honestly, the QC on this thing is pretty darn rock solid, except for one fun thing that I have, which is, not sure if you can see it in there, my battery adhesive did not work, and I can rattle this battery all around, and you can probably hear that on the mic. The battery just is jiggling all around there, which doesn't affect performance, but it's just like, come on, can we fix that, please? One like defining feature of the X3, as I randomly have a DeathAdder V3 Pro here in my hand for later, is it sort of starts out as more of an ergo on the back here, and then it tries to become much like an ambi mouse on the front. It's a very unique design. We're going to get into the shape comparisons now. Really quickly, just wanted to show you the 703 and the X3 side by side on Eloshapes. As you can see, there are slight shape differences, but their overall dimensions are very similar, and obviously the X3 is much, much lighter, coming in at 54 grams. I believe the lightest version of the G703 that I saw was 95 grams, that being the G703 Hero. All right, let's get into the side-by-side shape comparison that we've all been waiting for. This is the G703 versus the X3. The X3, as you can see here, has a much lower click height on both sides of the mouse, and it just tapers off more quickly across the board on the front. You can get a good idea. If we look at the right side here from the profile, you can see that the G703 starts taller and stays taller as it approaches the front of the mouse. The scroll wheel is also a much higher profile as well. If we flip the mice around, as far as this side, this is where it's super apparent that the X3 really dips off in the front there on the left side, and the G703, it stays tall. The G703 also has much higher or much larger side buttons, but as far as the side buttons go on the X3, they were one of my favorite parts of it, as well as the fact that they're still pretty big as far as side buttons go. So not really a detractor, but the ones in the G703 were absolutely massive. We're not really doing a direct comparison of the quality, but I would take the clicks on the G703 over the Pulsar X3 for what that's worth, but not really a shape difference. If we go back to the front view here, you can see there are much more defined comfort grooves on the G703 that make it just a more comfortable experience in my hand at least. And then if you come over to the Pulsar X3, there's not much of a comfort groove to be written home about there. It's more of just the shape of the mouse. Although one thing Pulsar did that I really love is they did round off the front of the clicks here, which makes it much more comfortable for someone like me who has his hand or his fingers hang off the front, and there's nothing sharp there like there is here on the G703. We'll also get a shot here from behind, which again kind of shows how we stay taller on the right side of the G703 here as we approach the front of the mouse. And then on the left side, you can kind of see that as well. From a rear profile, they reach about the same height. I feel a little bit more support for my palm, or for like the front part of my fingers here on the X3. It feels like it stays taller a little bit in this part of the mouse for a little bit longer, which is an interesting caveat to see there, as the rest of the G703 seems to stay taller for me. One more difference that I did notice is that this back right part here of the G703, there's a little less tapering there, and it drops off a little more drastically on the X3. And also, if you look over at where you place your thumb, it's a little bit, it doesn't taper in quite as much. It's a little wider on the X3, like the grip width here. I'll get measurements in a bit. Then the G703, it just does go a little bit deeper on that indent there. We'll also just go ahead and do a side-by-side bottom comparison here so you can get another idea of any shape differences you might pick up on. I'll go ahead and show kind of how that tapers on both the G703, and then you can see it's a little less prevalent there on the bottom for the X3 as well. One more angle here for good measure, the top down of the X3 versus the G703 as well. So this is the narrowest point of grip width I could find on the X3, and that came in at 63 millimeters. For the G703, this is above where the bottom taper would be. I got the narrowest point of the grip width to come in at 61.6 millimeters, so a narrower grip width at the middle for the G703 versus the X3. So let's grab some quick weights here. We've got the Pulsar X3 coming in at 54.2 grams, completely stock, battery moving in my case. And then we've also got the Logitech G703 Hero, the version that I have. This is puckless, and it comes in at 92 grams. One more comparison I did want to do is to another like de facto top of the market ergo. You can see my whack grip tape on there. That's the DeathAdder V3 Pro. I have the Faker edition here, and it's a pretty large ergo, and this X3 stands up to it as far as size and length. Obviously the shapes are very different, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys a quick look at some of the differences between these two mice. More of the standard tilting that you see on a DeathAdder V3 ergo, which is more like an EC shape, and then how you have the more ambi front here on the Pulsar X3. But yeah, the Pulsar X3 is no small mouse, that's for sure. So that about wraps it up for my thoughts on the Pulsar X3. It's not my favorite shape, and it's just not my favorite mouse implementation in general. At $100, which is about a standard Pulsar price range for not a premium mouse, it certainly doesn't feel premium in my hand. The clicks aren't great. The scroll wheel isn't great. I do like the side buttons and the coating, but I would expect more from Pulsar and more just given all the hype this mouse had coming out about it. It does do a good job of emulating a lot of aspects of the Logitech G703 shape, but it's definitely not a one-to-one, so you may still need to get it in hand to really know if it's what you've been looking for. Drop a like and a subscription if you really enjoyed the video, and if not, well, I'll do better next time.